SBC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
We're in a Georgia state of mind today on iGaming Daily. The southern state remains one of the larger markets that still doesn't have sports betting, but the Peach State is also notoriously averse to gambling expansion in general. Yet, at the moment, it feels like one of the only states with momentum towards getting something passed this legislative session. Are we experiencing some false hope? We'll discuss that, plus Saturday Night Live's recent sports betting send-up on today's episode of iGaming Daily. iGaming Daily is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 56% of the EGR Power 50 personalized player experiences with Optimove. And just a reminder, Optimove is offering new clients a first month free when they buy Optimove. For more information and to claim that offer, go to optimove.com/SBC. I'm Jessica Welman, editor of SBC Americas and Canadian Gaming Business, joined by media manager Charlie Horner. Charlie, I'm getting nostalgic because not quite this time last year, but the last time you and I were talking about Georgia, it was one of, I think, both of our favorite random stories that we've had to cover over the years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the first ever podcasts we did together was about Georgia.
Oh, that's true. We might have to go back and relive that one. When someone hijacks a soapbox derby bill designed to appeal to children to turn it into a sports betting bill, you do a podcast about it.
Yeah, and that's when you know you're a little bit too desperate.
I'll be honest, like we could have a federal bill pass, and if there was a soapbox derby bill situation, I'd be like, listen, we're talking about that today because it's just so wild. Things not so wild in Georgia right now, but very, very active. Okay, so for those who don't remember, last year, a sports betting bill in Georgia made it through the Senate before stalling in the House. There was this last-ditch effort to attach it to a soapbox derby bill that failed catastrophically. We're kind of back where we were last year already. The Senate has passed Bill Cowsard's version of sports betting. What's a little bit different is that this year they have decided this is a constitutional amendment needed in order to do this, meaning it will need to be taken to the voters. So earlier in the month, they passed kind of the framework for sports betting. Yesterday, they passed the actual mechanical resolution of a constitutional amendment that will be taken to the voters. Now it goes to the House. So, Charlie, I know you're not on the beat, but given attitudes and kind of what we talk about on Slack and stuff, does it seem to you like Georgia is a state where, compared to others, there's some amount of optimism?
I think so. I think if you were going to look at sort of the state of the nation at the moment, and how, there's a gun to your head and you said pick a state that would legalize sports betting this year, I would probably say Georgia. It did bring a lot of frustration last year, as you've already mentioned, and we just hoped that people would get around a table and talk and decide whether they were going to do this by a constitutional amendment or not. It seems that for as much as the Senate is concerned, that matter is settled. But we're only halfway through the process, and a lot could change.
Yeah, it does have to go through the House, where we haven't seen really any movement. Last year, the House was where this got stuck as well. I'm trying to remember. I believe Georgia is a Republican-controlled both, but you have to just look at kind of the political makeup of each of these chambers and where you have support. There are plenty of states where one chamber is very easily behind this, and then the other chamber is less into it. Alabama is a great example where we saw a huge gambling bill just kind of fly through the House. And then, yesterday in the Senate was kind of the first moment of that kind of resistance to it. I think the constitutional amendment piece of this is what is tripping people up as well. I think even within the sports betting industry, there was a point fresh out of PASPA where we were just excited to take kind of whatever state we got. You wanted the expansion, you were ready to move, you were ready to get it done. Now, I think people are being a little bit more careful. Think about, with the constitutional amendment, that's a whole other campaign. You know, you've paid all your lobbyists to be in Georgia and talk to lawmakers and build up the support that you need to get lawmakers behind it. Recall California and how many, like, hundreds of millions of dollars was spent there. So you're talking, you know, 8 figures at minimum to mount a campaign on a constitutional amendment. And the problem is there's a chance people say no.
Yeah. I mean, you said it yourself there that the wounds of California are still they're still open. And that stings a lot of people in the industry because mistakes were definitely made in 2022.
Well, and Christian Ganetsky, shout out to Matt Cradell at Play USA, who was it was like the Western Indian Gaming something or other, where FanDuel's Christian Ganetsky kind of said, you know, we did not handle California well. And they have since, I don't know if I want to say poached, but it certainly seems like National Indian Gaming Commission Chairman Sequoia Sivameyer left his job rather abruptly to very quickly go to get a job at FanDuel. So either way, Simmermeyer on the team now, and a great kind of tribal ad for that group to make sure that they work better with tribes. Seeing some of the data and the polling out of Georgia, I don't think you have necessarily the more toxic environment that you have in California, because it's not like in California, you had something kind of pitted against one another, where you're not supporting tribes if you support this bill. In Georgia, you're really just going against anti-gambling sentiment, essentially. And that's the hill you need to get over. I've seen some polling that would indicate that it would do decently well. I will say the phrasing of the question, which is always really important, is relatively straightforward too. Like, if you remember the California one, right, where it's like, well, if you feel like homeless people shouldn't have to be homeless and blah, 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 by the way, sports betting. This one's much cleaner. The question reads, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended so as to authorize the General Assembly to provide by law for sports betting in this state and provide for such proceeds to be used for educational funding for pre-K and Hope scholarships, services for gambling addiction, and the advancement of promotion of sports in this state? Very clean, very easy.
Pretty clear. If I was going to say anything, it's slightly positive. It's worded quite positively because you've got the whole we can help children, that kind of thing, but it isn't as dramatic as it was in California, where we were going to sort of end homelessness forever.
We fixed DraftKings is fixed homelessness. Yeah. I will say, listening to the debate so far, there are a decent chunk of people who are like, I don't love the idea, but I also think that we need to fund pre-K somehow, because right now that is not free in the state. So that seems to be a selling point, at least. And that's what's always a selling point with these, is like, we're going to bring in a boatload of tax revenue to be able to do things with. Interesting piece of this, by the way. And I think this was a tweak that happened with the vote earlier this week, that now there is 5% of money from sports betting set aside for what is called the Sports Promotion Fund. In the debate, what was essentially, that was explained as, this is money for the state tourism bureau and state governments and local governments to be able to go lobby for things like the NBA or NHL All-Star Game, the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the World Cup, essentially giving them more funds to try to entice huge tourism drawing sporting events to come into the state.
And again, you can see the argument where you can say, well, we're helping to build the economy, we're helping to help grow the city and bring jobs and that kind of thing. So they're already sort of loading the positive campaigning material. But yeah, we need to see where the money's coming from for the anti-gambling campaign, and B, we need to make sure that this thing gets through the House, so we do actually get the constitutional amendment that's being proposed.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a ton of opponents beyond your standard family foundation people. Again, I think the question is just within the industry, do the major lobbying groups like the Sports Betting Alliance want to commit to something that is not a sure thing? I also, I know they may believe that this constitutional amendment, and they're there. They certainly know how to lobby better than I do. I just don't know if this is one that you're going to win. It's a risk either way. Let me put it that way.
It's difficult. Oh,
go ahead.
I was going to say, so it's difficult because of the potential timing of this. If this goes to the polls in November, people are going to be so caught up in the presidential election. Things are going to be a lot more important than can I go and bet on DraftKings in the new year.
But you were arguably going to have better turnout than you do in a non-presidential election year. So it's like even more of a wild card. I hate to say that voter turnout is a good thing. But if you have lots of people going there for reasons related to the president, it's a different group of people than the people who are motivated to go and vote on these off years or where there's not as much at stake necessarily. Okay, Georgia, we'll keep an eye on that at SBC Americas. I believe today the House is going to vote on the DFS bill, which sailed out of committee earlier this week, fairly quickly after being introduced. Again, standard families values people showed up to oppose it, but not a lot of opposition beyond that. So we'll keep an eye on that and have that on SBC Americas. We'll have updates on Georgia Senate, and then we'll also, it's a week, man. We've got Maryland news and Alabama news on the legislative front that you can check out as well. All right, that was heavy. I need a break, and we will return and talk about something a little lighter and something I never thought we would talk about on iGaming Daily, Saturday Night Live.
Brazil, a global economic powerhouse, deeply passionate about sports, and now home to one of the hottest markets in gaming. And we're giving it the full SBC treatment. Join industry leaders, market experts, and all the major players in the country for 3 days of content, exhibition, and epic networking at the first ever SBC Summit Rio.
Welcome back to iGaming Daily. Charlie, I am not an avid Saturday Night Live watcher. I am one that when a funny skit kind of breaks onto social media, I will go and watch it. And lo and behold, this past weekend, we had a skit kind of break out that had to do with sports betting. SNL did a spoof of various sports books for a fake sports book called Rock Bottom Kings, in which bettors could essentially wager how their degenerate friend was going to go broke. Did you watch it? When did you watch it? What did you think of it?
Yes, I have seen it. I've seen it multiple times now. I saw it when you actually posted it to everyone earlier in the week, saying, "Guys, you've got to watch this." I have seen it. I have thoughts. It was definitely an interesting one, and it sparked a lot of debate this week. As I'm aware that you did a bit of a roundup of some thoughts this week earlier in the week.
Yeah, we just were kind of curious what people thought of it and put a call out on LinkedIn for people to offer their thoughts, and actually got more people wanting to talk about it than I kind of had room to write about. There are people out there who are quick to say, hey, let's not overblow the fact that we made SNL. It's not some watershed moment in the sports betting industry. And I fully agree with all of those people. And I think everyone that I spoke to essentially agreed as well. However, I think when you have a moment in the mainstream like this, and out of all the things they can choose to make fun of, they choose to make fun of the fact that your responsible gambling messaging seems profoundly insincere is worth taking a minute and having a little bit of self-reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the timing of this is somewhat significant, just being a couple of weeks after the Super Bowl, where everyone's going to be inundated with gambling ads. So it's probably firmly on the mind of the people, just the general public and the producers and creators at SNL. But yeah, for them to choose to run this topic does say that maybe there is a bit of gambling ad fatigue out there. But as a lot of people have been sort of saying this week, I don't think it's this huge moment where we should be, as an industry, thinking this is the worst attack that could have happened. There's been a lot of attacks on the industry in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and I'm sure it'll continue. But we've just got to keep a reasonable debate going about the standard and volume of ads, I think.
Yeah, and you make a good point, especially the past couple of weeks. The Wall Street Journal in particular has had a couple of really interesting stories. Catherine Sayer wrote about I believe it was a therapist who kind of fell down the rabbit hole of sports betting addiction and detailed her experience with operators kind of begging to stop being marketed to, and how that situation could have been handled better. The Wall Street Journal also had one yesterday that was essentially pointing out that some students with student loans are getting their loans and potentially just trying to build up a bankroll to pay them back quickly by using that money to gamble on sports. What's interesting to me is these very pointed research stories are certainly reaching an audience, but this like spoof satire, I think, is actually probably done more to get the conversation about RG going than some of these stories have. Maybe that's just my POV, though.
And that probably says a lot about the way we as society like to consume things and think about scandals or controversies these days. I know in the UK, at the start of this year, people only just started to take seriously a scandal with post office workers who had been accused of stealing money from the post office.
I was about to be like, not stamps. But, okay. Okay, post office theft. Noted.
They were
accused
accused
the corner on this?
They were accused of stealing thousands of pounds, and this is over 20 years old, and it only really came into the mainstream because of a docudrama series that went out on national TV at the start of the year, rather than the sort of really important investigative pieces that have been in the press. So I guess with this one, with SNL bringing sportsbook ads to the fore, maybe it does say something about us as society, about thinking about big issues.
What I will say, too, is, I mean, some of this is just the state of journalism these days. Most of these stories have been behind a paywall. And you have to really, seek them out if you want to read them. Whereas this SNL one, it's very easy to take that video and share it and reshare it. I think what was interesting is talking to people, how many of them were like, oh, yeah, it's spot on. And nobody really felt like they were out of bounds with what they were doing. I think because they nailed what these ads feel like. The look of the guys is Jamie Foxx in the BetMGM commercials, but they have all of the FanDuel overlays and graphics that you see in those commercials and things like that. And then they have the moment where they are just like, but we all know problem gambling is a really serious issue. And that's why you can bet on it. We have the fine print. We have these 5-second, if you have a problem. And they just really honed in on it and nailed it quite well. Again, this is not going to change the world, but it's very rare to get the SNL treatment that I think it was worth us taking time to chat with people about what, they thought of it and if it's going to have any sort of lasting impact. Short answer, not really, but it's an interesting moment to just look at what we're doing and question if we could be doing it a little bit better. Charlie mentioned that is available on SBC Americas. Charlie, also available on SBC Americas. You got into we didn't really get to do much of this since we're not as consumer facing, the Swiftie stuff during the Super Bowl, but you figured out a way to talk about it. So what can they go see on SBC Americas related to Taylor Swift?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's what everyone's thinking about this NFL season was betting on Travis Kelce because of his relationship with Taylor Swift. But yeah, I spoke with Bet365 this week, really just talking about their Super Bowl, how they performed during the Super Bowl, and they did run a number of Taylor Swift based special bets. Titled after some of her popular tracks. But generally, Travis Kelce bets were really popular. Kansas City Chiefs bets were really popular. So yeah, you can go and read about that on SBC Americas. We also talked a little bit about Bet365's expansion across the US in the last couple of years, because that's been quite notable, particularly in Ohio, which we've discussed on the podcast before. And they've recently launched in Arizona. So we just quickly touched on why Arizona was of interest to them. So yeah, you can go and read that on SBC Americas.
Quick note about their performance. So we got Kentucky data for November, December at last. They held 20% across 2 months, which is crazy. The first report we got promo cred, second report we didn't. We know that Bet365 did spend on promo cred in Ohio and kind of continues to be one of the bigger spenders. That I don't know if that maybe inflated it a little bit, but I mean, solid number 3 in the state, really high hold that I think certainly it's not the biggest market, but Bet365 has to be pleased with how they are performing in my home state. Quick note about my home state. I don't really need to go to Frankfurt this year as opposed to last year where I felt like I was making that drive 15 different times as we passed sports betting. There is a bill that seems on the precipice of passing, essentially just like an administrative reorganization bill. But I want to point out that Michael Meredith, the sponsor of sports betting last year, is putting this forth to essentially establish within the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission a division of compliance and a division of sports betting. Right now, it's a bunch of horse people handling sports betting in Kentucky, and that is kind of why we are now almost into March getting November and December at the same time. There's just a lot of work to do and not enough people to do it. We saw the original director of sports betting, Hans Stokey, who was hired with no sports betting experience, by the way, leave the organization in December. So props to them. It sounds like they're going to dedicate a little more resources to sports betting, which they need to. So that's kind of the news out of the legislative session of Kentucky this year. With that, I've got to go back and watch some more hearings. I've got Massachusetts Gaming Commission today, Maryland, keeping an eye on Georgia. Justin and I will be very busy. So check into SBC Americas on that and check in with us next week when we will certainly be talking about any legislative movement. And I'm really excited. We're going to have an interview with Johnny Avello from DraftKings talking about my favorite betting topic, betting on the Oscars. In the meantime, we will see you next time on iGaming Daily.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.